and
denominado
greet you
Balance
all to
Electoral
the virtual
2025,
event
que
called
como
Electoral
año con
Assessment
año el Tribunal
2025. Year after
Electoral del
year, the
Poder
Electoral
Judicial de la
Tribunal of
Federación de
the
México convoca para
Federation and the
analizar
Judiciary of
algunos de los
Mexico
eventos
has summoned you
electorales
all
más
to enjoy and
importantes
be part
del
of the
mundo.
most
El
electoral
objetivo será
conferences in the world.
analizar
The
las
clear
dinámicas
objective that we have is
propias,
to
qué
analyze
se
the
eligió, la
dynamism of
importancia de
what's
cada uno
happened
de estos
amidst the
comicios,
elections held
e
through the
intercambiar
process, the
reflexiones
relevance, and
aprendidas
to share
entre las
the
distintas
lessons learned
experiencias electorales
between
que se
all of the
expondrán el
authorities
día
and
de hoy.
electoral
Les
processes that will be
recuerdo a
discussed
quienes
today.
nos siguen por
Now, I
YouTube
remind you
que
all
por
for
favor
following our
envíen sus
streaming
preguntas a las
via
personas
YouTube to
ponentes
send
que
the
a continuación
questions to the
presentaré
direct
al correo
keynote speakers that
electrónico
I'll introduce right now. Send it to the internationales
internacionales.gov.mx. Tengo el
email.gov.mx.
placer y el privilegio
So
de
send your
moderar esta
questions to that
sesión y
email. I have
presentar a las
the honor
autoridades
and
y
the pleasure
personas
to moderate this
expertas
conference
que
and to listen to
serán
the expert
protagonistas en
panel
este
members, the
balance
keynote
electoral.
speakers
Y en
who
primerísimo lugar,
are
le doy la más
experts in the
cordial
assessment
bienvenida a
of
la
electoral
magistrada de la Sala
processes that have been
Superior del
held.
Tribunal Electoral
I
del Poder Judicial
welcome
de la Federación,
the
Mónica Aralí
Justice
Soto
of the highest
Fregoso.
chamber of the Electoral
También
Tribunal of
es
the
un
Federation of
privilegio
Mexico and the
presentar a la
Judiciary,
presidenta del
Monica Soto
Consejo
Fregoso. It's
Directivo del
also an
Servicio
honor to
Electoral de
present the
Chile,
chair, the
Pamela
Chilean
Figueroa,
counterpart, Pamela
al
Figueroa, who is
presidente de
part of
la
the
Corte
electoral
Electoral
authorities
de
of Chile,
Uruguay,
the
Wilfredo
Uruguayan
Penco,
president of the electoral
al
court, Mr.
presidente en
Wilfredo
funciones
Penco,
vocal
the
del Tribunal
president
Supremo
and
Electoral
senior
de
president
Bolivia,
of the Supreme
Gustavo
Electoral
Ávila
Authorities of
Mercado,
Bolivia, Gustavo Avila
a la
Mercado.
directora ejecutiva
I
del
introduce the executive
proyecto
director
Concord,
of the project
Catherine
Concord,
Elena,
Catherine Elena.
y posteriormente se incorporará
And
también con
later, we
nosotros
will
el
also have
expresidente de
the
la Comisión
presence
de
of the
Control
ex-president
Electoral
of
del
the
Parlamento
Electoral
Alemán
Control
y
Commission of the
presidente
German
del
Parliament
Observatorio de Redes
and
Sociales de
president
la Red
of
Mundial de
the
Justicia
Observatory
Electoral,
on
Patrick Salzberg. A todas y
Electoral
todos les
Justice
agradezco mucho
and
su
the
tiempo y su
Electoral Justice
disponibilidad
Network.
para
Mr. Patrick
exponer los
Salzburg
procesos
will be
electorales
joining
que
us
tuvieron
to
lugar
discuss
en
the
ya sean sus
elections
países de
held
origen
in
o en
their
los países
countries
que
of
les hemos
origin or in
solicitado
different
que analicen, como es el
nations
caso de la doctora
that we've
Elena.
asked
Sin
to
mayor
analyze the
preámbulo y a
elections as
nombre del
Miss
magistrado
Elena.
presidente, las magistradas
Without
que
further
integran
ado, the
la sala
justices
superior
and
y
the
los
members that
magistrados
are
que
part of
también
the High
integran la
Chamber
sala
and the
superior
justices
de
that are
nuestro
part of the
tribunal,
Superior Court
les doy
or
la más
High
cordial
Chamber of our
bienvenida y le cedo el uso
Electoral
de la voz
Tribunal
a la
are here
magistrada Mónica
to
Aralí
take the
Soto Fregoso
microphone.
para
So
presentar el caso
I
de
welcome
México.
Miss
Adelante,
the
magistrada, muchas
Chair and
gracias.
Justice of the Electoral
Muchas
Tribunal of
gracias,
Mexico, Mónica
Alberto Guevara,
Fregoso.
quien nos
Soto
modera en
Fregoso.
este día
Thank
y
you,
quien es
Alberto
el director
Guevara, for being
general
the moderator
de
today, for being the General
Relaciones
Director of
Institucionales
International and
Internacionales del
Institutional
Tribunal
Affairs at an
Electoral del Poder
institutional
Judicial de
level
la
of the Electoral
Federación.
Tribunal of the Federation.
Agradezco
Now, I
su
also thank
presencia
the
el día de
presence
hoy, a quienes nos acompañan como
of the rest of the
panelistas y
members who are part of this
asimismo a quienes nos
panel.
siguen
I
por
thank those who are
redes
following what we've been
sociales.
streaming through different means,
También
such as
les doy la
digital
bienvenida a
content and
este
social
panel
networks.
Balance
I welcome
Electoral
you to this
2025,
panel
el
called
caso
Electoral
mexicano.
Balance or
A
Assessment
Pamela
2025.
Figueroa
The Mexican
Rubio,
case of
presidenta del
reference is
Consejo
studied. I thank Ms.
Directivo del Servicio
Figueroa Rubio
Electoral
for
de
being part of
Chile,
this
a Wilfrido
conference from
Penco,
the
presidente
Chilean
de la Corte
authorities and the Board
Electoral
of
de
Chilean the
Uruguay,
electoral
Gustavo
processes, Mr.
Ávila,
Penco
vocal
from
del
Uruguay,
Tribunal
Gustavo
Supremo
Avila
Electoral de
from the
Bolivia,
Supreme Electoral
Catherine
Tribunal of
Elena,
Bolivia,
directora
Catherine
ejecutiva
Elena,
del
Executive
proyecto
Director,
Concord y
CEO of the Concord
vicepresidenta de la
Project,
Fundación
and VP
Internacional
or Vice
para
President
los
of the
Sistemas
International
Electorales,
Foundation for
AIFES.
Electoral Systems,
Igualmente,
IFES.
quien se integrará en unos momentos, Patrick
We're also
Salzburg,
waiting
presidente
for
del
Mr.
Observatorio
Patrick
de Redes
Salzburg to
Sociales
join
de la
us.
Red Mundial
He
de
is leading the
Justicia
Observatory
Electoral
on digital
y
means and
expresidente de
social
la Comisión
media,
de Control
member
Electoral
of
del
the Parliament
Parlamento
of
Alemán.
Germany and the Unit of
Pues
Control.
bien, durante mi
Well,
intervención
during my
hablaré del
participation,
proceso electoral
I will speak about
extraordinario que
the
se celebró en
extraordinary electoral
México
process
este
held
año.
in
En
Mexico during this year.
2025 se llevó
In
a cabo la
2025,
primera elección para
in Mexico, we
designar a
held the
las
first
personas
elections to
impartidoras de
appoint
justicia a nivel
justices
federal
or
y en
administrators of justice
19
at federal
entidades
scale in
federativas
19 federal
conocidas en otros
entities of this
países de la
country,
región como
known in
estados,
other countries of the
provincias
region
o
as states,
departamentos.
provinces,
No
or
solo se trató
constituencies,
de un
departments.
hecho sin precedentes
This
en nuestro
elections
país,
is
sino
unprecedented
también
in our
de un
country.
acontecimiento de
This
gran relevancia a
is
nivel
a
internacional.
happening that takes
Por
an
primera vez, la
international
ciudadanía
that
eligió
raises international
directamente
attraction. For the
a
first time, the citizenship elected
881
for the first time
personas juzgadoras a nivel
881
federal, a
justices at
saber,
federal level.
ministraturas de
So
la Suprema Corte de
there's different
Justicia de
justices
la
that are now
Nación,
part of the
la
Supreme Court of
totalidad
Justice
de
of
la
the nation.
integración de la Suprema
The
Corte.
total
Magistraturas
integration
del
of the members
Tribunal
has
de
taken place.
Disciplina
Justices of the Disciplinary Tribunal is another body that's a recent constitution amidst the electoral reform that has created this other body of boards of justices. Two other members were elected for the regional or local tribunals, having a total count of justices in circuit courts and of justices in different districts. In this case, I'll tell you that half of the collegiate tribunals have been part of this elections, and the district authorities have also been elected and appointed. So by 2027, according to the constitutional reform, we're going to be electing or selecting via popular vote the other half of the justices who will take a position. And as I've already mentioned, all the justices were voted for from 19 state entities. Something that's fundamental that I must highlight regarding the election process was the fact that the electoral authorities participated. The constitutional design and lawful design marks that this is a different type of election. It's an extraordinary election process. We had the participation of the three branches of government: the executive, the legislative branch, and the judiciary branch. The Senate of the Republic issued the invite. The assessment committees that were appointed by the three branches, the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches, examined the people who submitted their resumes to participate. And the judiciary branch issued its resolutions of any challenged election process to guarantee that the elections would take place according to what's manifested in the Constitution or in the Charter. During the process, the judiciary branch received 6,653 cases that were challenged. I want to highlight differences in the cases filed. Out of the design in the election process, we will compare it with the elections of the executive and the legislative elections in our countries. Here, this is the case of exception. The political parties were not allowed to participate in any way, sort of manner in any of the stages of the elections held. That's what usually happens. Political parties do participate in other types of elections that are held in this country for the executive elections and the legislative elections. And on the contrary, the three branches of the power, the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches participated in these elections, which is contrary to the ordinary elections that we carry out here for other positions. So these are some of the outstanding differences that are very specific between this type of elections, which are extraordinary, in the conventional elections through popular vote. Amidst this change of paradigm, the Electoral Tribunal of the Federation, which I am part of, has the mandate to guarantee justice, which is autonomous, impartial, unbiased, institutional, and professional. There was tutelage of the political electoral rights of all the people in Mexico, all Mexicans, implementing the highest in constitutional standards, observing the principles of transparency, lawfulness, certainty, equality, and parity amidst the process of elections. We also guaranteed that there was compliance with a constitutional or chartered or mandate. The federal judicial elections took place, even if there's other incompetent authorities which issued their decrees of suspension of the electoral process that was held. So we demonstrated that electoral justice is a pillar. Electoral justice is independent and it serves society. It's part of the Mexican government and state. So I can tell you that there's such a deep change in its design in the process of elections. It generated polarization. There is some in favor, stakeholders in favor of this type of model of electing these type of elections that were executed to elect justices, and there were some voices against, stakeholders against. However, the Electoral Tribunal of the Federation, well, admitted an instrument once the Superior Court of this nation left firm issuance of the sentence or rulings regarding the case of the election of justices. So we carried out our duties as it's manifested in the nation's charter and elected the judiciary through the elections. That's why we preserve social peace and the rule of law. The rule of law is firm, and the justices who were elected started executing, carrying out their duties to protect the Mexican citizenship. However, we still have time for the scrutiny, for the assessment, thorough assessment of the design that must happen during the first phase. We need to be capable of measuring what's happening in short term, and we're going to continue measuring the future elections that will be held in 2027. That could be like the first process or phase of assessment, the first cutoff, to make sure that we're analyzing properly the results of the electoral reform. Another fundamental aspect that was analyzed through the reform and the elections held is that the elections of the justices led us to observe gender parity. It's the first election in Mexico through which, from its design, the election process establishes in its DNA gender parity. Gender parity is guaranteed. There is no way of holding these elections without having gender parity, because we'd have to go through the proper constitutional amendments to guarantee parity. For the first time, the bodies of the judiciary branch of the federation are achieving that gender parity, or there's more participation of women, or 50% of representation. There was a deficit. There's a 200-year gender parity representation in Mexico after 200 years. So we had only 20% of women participating in the positions of the administration of justice in the highest levels. So we can see our assessment of gender parity and what we've achieved through the process of elections. Now we're in that level of standard of achieving gender parity in the bodies of administration of justice. For the first time, the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation, composed by 9 justices elected, 5 women justices and 4 male justices. It was composed prior by 11 justices. Today, there's only 9 justices in the Supreme Court. The majority of justices are women in the Supreme Court. We elected in the judiciary of the Federation, we elected 17 justices, 1 male justice, and 1 female justice in the high chamber. And there's 5 and 5 justices for the 5 regional chambers of the Electoral Tribunal. Each one of the chambers is composed by 2 women justices and 1 male justice. And the rest of the regional chambers are led by a woman for the first time in the nation's history. In the disciplinary tribunal, in this disciplinary, the judiciary of this federation is subdivided into 2. There's the admin body agency and a new disciplinary agency or body. This is composed by 5 members, 5 justices. 3 are males and 2 are females. Regarding the collegiate tribunals of circuit and district courts, the percentage of elected women for the specific positions is approximately around 60%. 60% are women, 40% are males, which clearly proves that there's parity, there's gender parity. So Mexico has broken through that threshold or barrier in which we considered that the citizenship was not voting for women justices. So Mexico has become an international example of reference when guaranteeing the full participation of women in the decision-making roles in the 3 branches of government. The parity in the judicial branch was a historic debt. This marks a decisive progress to achieve an egalitarian system that guarantees justice, administrated also by women. So this not only opens a door, but it makes a robust issuance of criteria or court rulings more robust, with proper, stronger perspective that's plural, inclusive, that can be also analyzed by other counterparts and experts to administrate justice properly. To celebrate my participation, I want to comment. Democracy is alive. Democracy is constantly evolving, and it strengthens itself through open dialogue, the citizenship's participation, and the capacity that the institutions have as a response mechanism to challenges. The position of the justices in Mexico don't only transform the way in which we elect those who will be administrating justice at federal level in different state entities, but we also make sure that there is greater presence of women in positions of judgment, of issuance of judgment. Achieving the gender parity is not just a mere number or statistic. We have criteria, issued sentences, or rulings that integrate gender perspective in our courts. Because if you compose the judiciary branch, truly compose the judiciary branch, mirroring society, we issue criteria or sentences that are transforming, more open, more sincere, that meet the demands of our societies, that claim justice. So it's substantive. We see that women's participation and male participation leads us to have equal access, and we have equal access or egalitarian access to the administration of justice and to offer the proper tools to live free of violence and exercise our rights fully. The Electoral Tribunal of the Federation in Mexico will be in compliance with its constitutional mandate. We're an independent and strong body. We make sure that each democratic process takes place in compliance with lawfulness and the demands and provisions that align any election process. Thank you. I'm here to serve you all. Thank you.
Magistra, por
Thank you, Justice.
preciso panorama
Thank you,
de lo que
Justice,
ha
for being
sucedido
so
en México
precise
este
with the
año
landscape,
y
sketching out
también
the
de sus
landscape of what's
implicaciones y las
happened throughout
consecuencias
this
que ha
year. Thank you for
tenido en la
explaining the
integración del Poder
consequences and what
Judicial
it
con
implicitly
una
means and how it
perspectiva de
impacts the
género.
judiciary
Y de
with gender
México volamos
perspective.
hasta el Cono
And
Sur y a
we're going to
continuación le
go
pediremos
now
a la
to our
presidenta del
keynote
Servicio
speaker from the
Electoral de
Southern
Chile,
Cone. We have
quien
the
de
floor
viva voz, como
open
una de
for
las
the Chilean
protagonistas de este
counterpart.
proceso, ha
She's
accedido
one
a
of the keynote
compartirnos
speakers
también
of
su
the
experiencia. Por
process.
favor,
Our Chilean
adelante, presidenta
authorities
Figueroa.
are here to share their experience.
Bueno,
Thank you,
muchas
Ms.
gracias.
Figueroa.
Quisiera
Thank you,
agradecer
Chair.
en primer
Now,
lugar
thank
al
you all very
Tribunal
much. I'd like to
Electoral
thank the
Judicial de
Federal Electoral
Federación de
Tribunal of
México
the
por
Judiciary in
esta
Mexico
invitación. Me siento
for
muy
having
honrada de poder
invited
compartir
me.
mi
I feel
experiencia en
honored
Chile
after
junto a
having
otras
Chile
experiencias
share its
internacionales.
experiences with
Agradecer a la
other
magistrada
international
Mónica Soto
experiences.
por su
Thank you,
amable
Ms.
invitación y
Justice
organización, Alberto
Mónica
también
Aralizoto
por todo
Fregoso.
lo
Thank you,
que ha
Alberto
implicado
Guevara,
las
for everything that
invitaciones y
you've
cómo
done.
llegar
Thank you
a
for
estos
all
distintos
the
países
logistics, for
que las
inviting
audiencias
us,
están
for calling all the
recientes de
countries
procesos
involved to share their
electorales que han
recent
tenido
experiences regarding
distintas
the electoral
complejidades
processes
en
that
el
we've had.
contexto que
Thank you for sharing all the
vivimos.
challenges in the cases of reference
Alberto, me
amidst the
gustaría
context
compartir
that we're living
una
now.
presentación,
Alberto,
creo que
I would like
puedo,
to share one of my presentations if you
me
allow me
dicen si
to.
se
That would be
ve,
great if you let me see.
¿se ve?
Sí, sí,
I
la
don't know if you
vemos
can
en
see
el
what
Zoom.
I'm about to share here. Yes,
Sí,
we can
listo.
visualize it via
¿Sí la ven?
Zoom.
Sí.
Thank you.
Solo
Can you
para
see?
poder compartir, como
I'm
tenemos solo
here.
10 minutos,
I'm
algunos
here to
datos que
share
creo que
what
sería
I
importante
can in
para
10
mostrarles
minutes
y
worth
la
of
dimensión
time,
de lo
but
que han
I'd like
sido
to show
las
you the
elecciones
dimension of what we've been
presidenciales y
doing
parlamentarias en
in the
Chile este año
elections held in Chile this year. We
2025.
elected members of parliament, and these elections
Bueno,
were
lo
held in
primero decirles
2025.
que esta elección presidencial y
First of all,
parlamentaria
I'd
que
like to tell
acabamos de
you that
tener
the
el
executive
16 de
elections and the
noviembre de
parliament elections that took
2025
place in
y
2025
estamos
and the
además en medio
16th
de un
of November
proceso
and
porque tenemos
17th
una
has
segunda
led us to analyze and
elección
scrutinize the
presidencial el
process. We have
14 de diciembre.
other
Es
elections
una
held in
elección
the
que cierra un
14th of
largo ciclo
December. They're
electoral, un
presidential
ciclo
elections. So
electoral
it's
que
the cycle,
comenzó
the
el
electoral
año
cycle. It
2020 con
started
el
in
proceso
2020
constituyente que
with a
vivió, ¿no es
constituency
cierto?,
that
dos
Chile
procesos
lived or went
constituyentes
through the process
entre el
of the
año
constitutional
2020 y
process in Chile in
2023.
2020,
Y
2023.
también en ese periodo tuvimos
Through
elecciones
that process or
preliminares
term, we held
donde
the
elegimos
normal conventional elections where we
presidente de la
elected
República,
the
Congreso,
president of our
gobernadores
country, the
regionales,
Congress,
alcaldes.
Parliament,
Tuvimos
members,
todos los niveles de
mayorships,
elecciones,
and
lo
other
que
government officials. We had
significó
all
que desde
levels
el
of
año
elections held in Chile. So
2020
since
hemos tenido
2020,
elecciones
we
todos
had
los años,
elections held
incluso
year after
elecciones
year.
múltiples que se han
Multiple
dado,
election processes
más
have
de una
taken
elección
place, as
el
I've
mismo
told you.
año,
We've
lo
had
que nos
more
ha
than one election
significado
process
generar
in 1 year, which
distintas
means that
innovaciones
we've had to
legales
create
y prácticas
different
para
amendments
la
into the
implementación de los
practical case of
procesos
our law
electorales en el
to
contexto
implement
de
it
pandemia
properly amidst
y
the
luego
elections that were
con lo que
that were
ha
held even
implicado
throughout the
una
pandemic.
ampliación de la
So
participación en el ámbito del
this has
una
led us to
elección muy
broaden the
importante
participation
y
of
en
our
eso me
citizenship throughout
gustaría
the elections,
detenerme
making
un
it
par
all
de
so
minutos porque
important.
creo que es
So
algo
that's
que
why I
se
needed to
delega
share this in a couple of
y
minutes now in my intro.
aporta en
To
este
share, I want to
contexto, ¿no es
explain
cierto?,
the Chilean
de los
context
procesos
and what we
electorales
can
a
contribute
nivel
with
global.
and what's happened in
En
our
el caso de
global
Chile,
elections as well. Now, in the
desde
case of Chile, during the last electoral cycle, we've had different amendments, reforms in our body of law that affect the electoral system. Out of these reforms or amendments, there's two of great impact or that are relevant so we can understand the political process, the electoral political process we've had to go through as a nation. Now, first of all, the legislation was object of a study of at the local level. We went to see what was happened in different state entities and to understand the geolocation, and we analyzed those who through geolocation were allocated the voting polls or booths close to the electoral districts that we have, to have our units placed close to the citizenship at a nation scale. That has had a very important impact because it generated, it facilitated the process for the citizenships to transfer themselves to the booths and vote and cast their votes. So we've been capable of effectively incorporating or also accepting the votes for people who were serving time in prison. They could cast their votes and they were not able to cast their votes even if they were serving time in prison. They could not transfer themselves to the booths to cast their votes. So with the new legislation and the legislation amendments, we have enabled them to cast their votes, and we have placed in the precincts or the jail systems and the networks and booths so they can cast their votes through the ballots and they can exercise their rights in the penitentiaries. So that's part of the process of amendment in the legislation that has enabled us to really be closer to the citizenship so they can all vote. But also this has made us or helped us have people who have the right to vote. They could not cast their votes because of practical material issues. They could not cast their votes. Now they can cast their votes. So that's something that I would like to highlight that's happened in my country. There's a lot of amendments taking place in Chile, and there will be more, but we can't go over all of them. But in 2024, and based on different processes here in the constituencies, and what we had to do is Chile incorporated the mandatory compulsory vote in Chile. In Chile, voting was mandatory in 2012. I mean, we're back to democracy since 89. In 2012, we had our laws and regulations, which meant that voting was mandatory, and people who did not cast their vote, they can receive a sanction or be object of a sanction, or they'd have to pay some fee, and we had to have the vote, the voluntary vote, the plebiscite, the constitutional plebiscite that regulated it all specifically, led us to study the regulations, to study the constitutional amendments and see how it was all processed. But we've incorporated the mandatory vote process. So we called in more participation throughout the process of elections. So in 2024, we had the permanent legal reforms. So the compulsory vote is part of our constitutional obligation and mandate in Chile. But the mandatory vote had to be executed with a different process or with a different model. But today it's automatically done. You're automatically registered to vote in Chile. Everyone in Chile, everyone that's administrated, that's 18 or older, that's not disabled in any way, form, or manner, can automatically be registered. They're automatically registered in the roster. There's people there enlisted to vote. So these are the people that are ready to vote. As I've told you, they're part of the roster. So there's a specific norm that states that voting in Chile is mandatory. So the electoral roster, the list had an increment, significant increment. Not only do we understand the way in which the process of elections is configured, that's part of what the electoral authority has to watch over. And there is a specific number of nominees, candidates. The context of elections is very important. Just technically speaking, we heard about the fact that in Mexico there is like polarization, new scenarios, that the institutions that held elections have to go through the process. We have to go through the assessment, checks and balances of all the elections. That's been very relevant for the Chilean experience. Now,
un
I prove or show you
que ha
with the
elaborado el Programa
graphics here,
Naciones Unidas para el
what we've
Desarrollo, que
achieved
representa
with
el
the
juicio
authorities of
electoral,
Chile.
que
This chart
muestra la
shows the evolution of the electoral
de la
participation.
evolución de la participación electoral en
So
Chile.
we have the
Desde el año
evolution of the
1988 y el
citizenships
retorno a la
participation in
democracia
Chile
hasta
since
el
88. You
momento
see the
actual.
democratic
Si
model,
ustedes se
and we've
fijan,
measured
la
everything in our
diferencia
democracy
en los
to the current
momentos donde
process or
existe
to
el
the
voto
current model.
obligatorio y el
If you
voto
see the vote
voluntario,
is mandatory,
tiene
or
un
it
impacto
could
muy
also be
significativo
you could also
entre
be a volunteer
el
go to
nivel, el
vote, but there's
porcentaje
a
de
significant
participación
vote. We
electoral.
measured this historically there.
Y
There's
eso
the
es algo que
electoral
el órgano
process,
electoral, en este caso el servicio electoral,
and the
tiene
electoral
muy en la
body
mira
here
para poder
has to
trabajar en
be
todo lo que es el
watchful,
proceso de
observant,
organización de las
and see
elecciones.
what's happened
Lo
with all the
hacemos de
process and
manera
how we
muy
organize the
coordinada también
elections.
con el
We
Tribunal
coordinate our
Nacional por
efforts with
Elecciones
the
y el
electoral
Tribunal Electoral de
tribunal,
nuestro país, que son como en muchos
and
países
other
a nivel
authorities
mundial
and
dos
tribunals.
instituciones separadas.
In our country, we have
Una que
two
es el órgano
autonomous authorities.
autónomo
One
administrativo que
branch
organiza la
is the
elección y el otro
administrative
el
body
órgano
or branch that
jurisdiccional que
organizes.
planifica la elección y
And
también
then there's the other
recibe
branch,
reclamaciones
which
en
is the one that
distintas
qualifies or
etapas del
ranks the
proceso
elections process that are
electoral,
held in its
pero
different
ha sido un
phases.
desafío y un trabajo
But it's a
conjunto.
challenge. It's
Y
a
creo que es
joint
uno de los
endeavor. It's a
ítems
joint effort.
importantes a
So I
considerar.
believe it's very important
Esta
for us to
ampliación
consider those
de la
specifics.
participación
The
tiene
fact that we're
implicancias también en
broadening
la
the
organización del
participation of
propio
the
sistema
citizenship
político,
depends also
un
on the political
aumento
system that
de
we've
partidos
had.
políticos, de coaliciones, también del
There's
número de
coalitions, there's a
candidaturas,
greater number
que ha
of political
significado en
parties.
muchos casos
This
mayor
means in
fragmentación del
many of the
sistema de
cases that
partidos
there's
y
greater
también
fragmentation
mayor
in political parties,
polarización.
or there's more
En el
political
caso del
parties.
sistema
It's all
electoral
very
de
polarized.
Chile, la
And the
regulación sobre la
Chilean
participación de las
electoral
mujeres
process,
es una
there's the
regulación
laws and
transitoria
regulations.
y que se
And
acopla
we
a
have
una
the
ley
participation
de
of women
cuotas que se
also being
incorporó en una
regulated.
reforma
There's a
electoral del año
gender parity or
2014
gender quota
durante
parity
un periodo de
that's
3 elecciones,
that's
la
also
primera
there,
fue el
that's been drafted
2021,
since
la segunda el
2014.
2025 y la
In
tercera será el
2021 were the first
2029.
elections,
Los partidos
2025 were the
políticos
next
tienen la
elections that we held,
obligación
in
y todas las
2029
listas de
will
candidaturas tienen
the
la
future
obligación de
elections that
presentar
we
unas
are
cuotas de
holding.
candidatas,
We
¿ya?
need to
Que es
reach
una
that
proporción
gender parity or
60-40,
gender
no puede
quota.
haber más
As you
ninguno
see,
de
you
los
said
dos
it, there you have a 60-40
géneros, de
percentage of
ninguno de los
women
dos sexos
participating in
representados en
males.
las
You know,
listas
there's different two
electorales.
genders being
Y en el
represented
caso de
there
Chile
in the
eso solo
electoral
existe
roster.
para el Congreso,
For
eso no existe
candidates
en
in
otros
Chile,
niveles, no hay una
you
experiencia
see what we
paritaria
have
como
to
lo que
share
nos
there
contaba
regarding what's
recién
happened
la
in
magistrada
Congress.
Mónica Soto.
As
Sí
Ms.
existe
Monica
eso
Soto
para
just
el
said,
proceso constituyente,
this is
pero no
something that
en la
happened. We
actualidad.
went through a
Sin
process,
embargo,
as you
la
did.
participación
But
y la
however, we are
representación
participating
política de
and
las
we have the
mujeres
political
electas
participation
para
and
la Cámara de
representation of
Diputados
women
y
when
para el
they're elected
Senado
for the
ha
Chamber of
ido en
Deputies
un
and the Senate.
aumento considerable en el caso
So
de
it's
las
increased
senadoras,
considerably
pero hay
in the
un
case of our
estancamiento en
senators.
el caso de
But
los
there's
diputados.
measured
Entonces,
stagnation
este
in
es
the
un
cases of
punto de
deputies
bastante relevancia.
or
El
government
Servicio
officials
Electoral como
there.
organismo autónomo y técnico
This is an
ha
autonomous
colaborado en las
technical
distintas
body, and we've
instancias
cooperated in
donde se
different
está
levels.
discutiendo
As you can
la
see, this is
posibilidad de
all matter
ampliar
of
el
debate.
periodo y el
We're
alcance de
broadening
la
the term
regulación
and
de
the scope
representación de las mujeres en los distintos
to find
órganos
the gender
de
parity and proper
representación.
representation
Entonces,
of
ese
women in
creo
the
que también es
system.
un tema sobre
I
el
think
cual seguiremos trabajando y la
that's an
experiencia
issue
en
that we
Chile,
have to
como en la
continue
mayoría de
working
los
on in
países, la
Chile.
participación de las
As the
mujeres
majority of the
ha sido
countries, there's
muy
a lot of women
relevante para el
participating, so
fortalecimiento
it's all very
democrático
relevant.
y eso es uno
We
de
want
los
to strengthen
pilares, ¿no
our
es cierto?, de la
democracy. So that's one
integridad
of the pillars
electoral,
that
poder
leads us to
hacer un
respect the
sistema
integrity of the
electoral que sea
elections.
inclusivo, que
We want the
represente a los
system
distintos
to be
sectores de la
inclusive, that does
sociedad
represent
y
the
de esa
members of
manera
the different
dotar de
sectors in our
legitimidad
societies
al
and
sistema.
to hold legitimate
Ahora quiero
systems.
comentarles algunos datos del actual proceso
I want to share some
electoral.
of the data of the current
En el
electoral
caso de la
elections that
elección
are being
presidencial
held,
y
or the
parlamentaria
elections
de
of
Chile,
the parliament and the
tuvimos un
executive
padrón
branch in
definitivo
Chile.
de
We had a definite roster of
15.779.102 personas, de las cuales
15,779,102 people in the roster, out of which
15.618.167 ejercen su sufragio en
50,168,167
Chile y
exercised the right to vote in Chile, and
170.935 personas en el exterior. La legislación del voto
169,935
en Chile en el
voted from
exterior también
abroad.
es una
So the
legislación
elections in
reciente.
Chile are
Esta
held,
fue
and
la
we admit
11ª
votes from
elección
abroad.
donde los
This is the
chilenos en el
11th
exterior
election
pudieron
process in which
participar
we
y
admit votes
estamos
from
ampliando
Chileans living abroad.
significativamente
So
esa
we're
participación.
broadening the participation of our citizenship abroad. In the case of Chile, when there's people that come from other countries that have been residents for 5 years, they can have the right to vote and for parliament, for the executive branch at a regional, local level. And in this case, 885,940 people had the right as residents to cast their votes. We established 3,998 booths to cast votes in the nation's territory as well as abroad. 203,646 people participated as seniors and observers at the tables. In the case of Chile, the positions during election day are given away or elected by a raffle. People just are appointed to take a position during election day in that voting booth. If they don't show up during election day, they're sanctioned or object of a penalty. This election led us to analyze what was happening with different candidates. In the case, we had 8 candidates for the executive branch for the presidential elections in our country. As I've told you, none of these candidates obtained the majority to be elected in the first round of elections. So according to our legislation, there's a second round of votes. There's ballots being quantified. And in December 14th and Sunday, December, we measured what happened with the candidates with the majority. We had 125 candidates for senators, 7 regions in Chile, and the senators were there in a period of 8 years. We elected them every 4 years, and 1,096 candidates were present to take office for 154 chairs or seats. You see, we have 179 seats. So you see the volume and the quantity in each column. That's the reality of the Chilean elections in our country. That's the heading of my slideshow is not correct, but here you see the participation or the electoral participation. And I'd like to pinpoint one of the key factors of the electoral process that we went through in Chile. There's a lot of participation after the mandatory legislation came to effect. In Chile, 81.87% of the roster participated. 39.93% of Chileans abroad participated because the Chilean vote from abroad is not compulsory. But we're working on that. We want to have more voting booths or places where we can have our people from abroad cast their vote, which led us to measure the total participation, which is 85.41%. In the presidential elections, we considered that the valid votes that were issued 96.24%. That's what in the presidential elections, 82.89% for senators, 39.97% for different government officials, deputies, and the null votes are there. 10.79 for senators, and you see 12.86 for senators, and then 6.52 for senators, 7.17 for deputies. And that's part of the phenomenon that take place. Because amidst elections, those who cast their vote sometimes don't elect the members of their preference amidst the elections, even though the nominees are there. There's the unique electoral ballot, and having that ballot has also been a challenge for the citizenship. So they participate and participate when informed, you know. I want to show you a bit of the evolution of the Chilean process and the votes from abroad that we've shared with you in this graph. The technical notes, in the technical notes, we have questions regarding the challenges to measure the electoral integrity. I would like to have another theme being discussed, which is part of the process in this long electoral cycle that Chile has lived throughout the electoral and parliament elections as well. What does the first point have to do with the second? You know, it's about the informatic system too. We have the system, and we've observed that the elections, the electoral campaigns, have taken place in contexts where even more now than ever, computer systems have also, they have a lot of information, skewed information, biased information, false news. There's use of new technologies that's also a challenge for the electoral bodies and for different stakeholders in the system. So I think that this is something that we have to discuss with the other authorities of electoral services. We're monitoring this, and we see how you're using digital means or other systems to have governance over it. With civil society, we've seen how digital platforms are being used. We're working with political parties, candidates, civil society, and others as stakeholders to
Presidenta,
tackle
disculpe,
and understand the situations.
un minutito para cerrar, por favor.
Ma'am, just
Gracias.
1 minute to provide closure to your participation, ma'am. The use of computer science systems requires or demands us to continue analyzing this work. And political digital violence is something that we've observed in different cases, in the case of women. And only to wrap up, I like to refer now to the way in which the electoral system operates. And I want to tell you the following. International cooperation is key to study the integrity of the elections with a global perspective, and compared analysis leads us to understand the thorough challenges. As electoral services, we have established our work as permanent work with different electoral bodies throughout the whole region at a global scale, with technical bodies that are part of other disciplines. Now, I wanted to highlight these points because I believe they're very important so we can continue working, respecting the integrity of our elections in our countries at a global scale. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you,
Sin duda, una
Miss President. Thank
experiencia
you
de la
very
que todos
much. Thank you for
aprendimos, como
sharing
bien lo
your
señaló
experience. We've
en el
learned a
largo
lot from your
ciclo electoral
experience
que
as
vivió
you've
Chile desde
mentioned in the long
2020
electoral cycle
y
that Chile
con las
lived through since
particularidades que tuvo este
2020.
año,
We know
con las
you had your
modificaciones a las que usted
specifics.
ya
We
hizo
know you have
referencia.
your
Sin mayor preámbulo, le
modifications, and
quisiera
you've
pedir al
already
presidente de
mentioned
la
the
Corte Electoral
differences.
de Uruguay, el
Without
doctor
further ado, I'd
Wilfredo
like to
Penco,
ask
que a
Mr.
continuación nos
Wilfredo
comparta
Penco
su
to
propia
take the
experiencia en
floor.
las
He is the
elecciones
chair of the electoral
bajo su
authorities in Peru.
liderazgo este año
Mr.
en su
Penco,
país.
please
Por favor,
share
adelante, doctor
what
Penco.
your observations are or your feedback are after the elections held in your country. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very important happening in this great conference. In your way, this year we celebrated elections in different municipalities, in different sections of our country in the second Sunday of May. That's how we wrap up a very important long electoral cycle that started in June 2024, to be precise, with the internal elections that took place with different political parties that were elected. We elected the presidential candidates for the executive branch per party. We had the national like elections taking place. We had different departments participate in the elections. We had up to 3 candidates to hold positions as chairs of government, department by department or section, region by region. The nation's elections took place, as I said, in the last Sunday of October 2024. There was a deferment of the presidential elections to November, the last Sunday of November. And during May this year, we had to review the elections of the regions or departments and municipalities that compose us in the country. So there are concurrent elections that have taken place since 2010. When we created that third branch of government, or the municipal layer of government, it led us to elect in each of the cases the representatives for the department. Superintendents were present in one of the 19 regions in the countries, which are part of our country, and there's other ways to break out the government authorities in different levels or layers. There's 136 municipal authorities elected. So we have a mayor being elected and 4 consigliere or 4 council members. So 19 superintendents were elected, 579 elections were taking place, 136 mayorships were elected, 544 members were also elected to take office for a 5-year plan. For the municipal and regional elections, we had over 1,600,000 members voting there. And we're trying to compare our case to Mexico. Compared to Mexico, I mean, we're just a small country, a small district compared to Mexico's elections. And the circuit plan led us to measure 7,700 and a bit more units. But all of these units were composed by 3 members and public representatives appointed by electoral boards of each department. The votes in Uruguay are mandatory. And we concluded measuring the participation level, which is 86.88% of our people participated. The voting process in Uruguay leads us to place our vote in the ballots. These ballots are printed by the political parties with a specific model or template that's established by electoral court laws. So the system is the double and triple simultaneous vote. This means that if you vote for one party, you can vote because there's coalitions, political coalitions in each country, and there's a list of candidates. So the preliminary scrutiny is manual. We can't quantify the votes manually at the ballot where the urn is. And we have this measured and populate information in an app or in a system, and we compare and tally the information, the paper ballot, and we keep the registry. And then after the scrutiny, we have the final quantification and scrutiny, department by department, out of the 19 regions that were processed for elections to elect the superintendents or the representatives in Uruguay. In Uruguay, we have been present for 101 years as a body, and this body or this agency has to watch over all the electoral processes held economically as well, to decide and rule what's happened in the last instance. If there's any challenges or claims, we analyze the cases filed. Amidst the whole process, there's a plebiscite. There's specific processes of legal nature or specific natures. We have 9 ministers that are elected by the General Assembly. We have the chambers of the legislative power, one that's elected by 2/3 of the votes, and the political parties that are represented there lead us to analyze the proportionality of it. We have a list of candidates and those that can be substituting elements. We see what makes it compulsory. So we have a list of candidates, people of different walks of life that are present in the list of candidates. I must say that during this circuit, there were 3 specific elements that we can analyze at local and municipal levels. These are concurrent elections, but these are sometimes, these are different elections. We have simultaneous elections being held for the 4th time since year 2010. The Electoral Court has issued its laws and regulations. In these bodies of law, we establish that whoever submits the information of a candidate to be elected, they can't just be appointed internally if elected by any other political party, this court resolution or sentence has been voted for. And those who voted for that resolution have been divided in their conditions, in their grounds. But there's a sentence that impedes or stops one candidate being a representative if they've been elected by a different political party. So the Supreme Court has been divided and they issued or cast the resolution. And somebody that has been elected by another political party cannot be represented properly in a ballot. If not, they could be nullified. The elections could be nullified. There's a third characteristic of the elections. If there's a candidate that's going to be appointed for a Ministry of Interior, it has to be a formal process observed by the board or a commission that superintendent, government official that has it appointed could be object of analysis or scrutiny to see if he could be elected or re-elected as established in our provisions. Since it's a formal process, it's called processing. If the justice does not communicate properly to the court, he could receive a penalty or even serve time in prison. Think about the formality and how the judiciary branch also participates or abstains from issuing any resolution regarding that process of judgment. If a trier factor, the justice does not communicate properly, the court and the superintendent or the intendant, you see how there are candidates and how they can become elected or re-elected. So a person might be appointed and claim it's his or her position, and then the prosecution could have escalated this to a matter of appeal or a cause of appeal. So the Tribunal of Appeals ordered the justice to materialize what was formulated in the issued sentence. However, it was all in hands of the electoral courts. We question whether if the superintendent can continue in his or her appointed position. So that divided the positions of the justices, and that person was not removed from office, or was he or her removed from office as the mandate, as our law states. So we have to analyze the case in this case in which that person might serve prison or not, or be separated from his or her position. In some municipalities, we had ties. There's some candidates that had the same number of votes. In the case of mayors, in some elections, we had ties based on case law and our laws that were derogated. So there's loopholes in the law. So the electoral court issued its criteria resolution or sentence, and we just elected the person even if there was a tie in the elections. So they solved according to what's described in the provisions. After having said this, I close my participation and I'm here to serve you. I'm here to serve you all, to
Muchísimas
clarify
gracias,
anything
presidente
you might want
Penco,
to
no
clarify.
solamente
Thank
por
you,
la
President
precisión
Penco, so
en
much
la ejecución
for being
de su
precise about
intervención, sino también por
the
habernos
time and
compartido datos
your
que son sumamente
participation. Thank you,
interesantes para
Mr.
la
Penco,
comunidad
for having shared
internacional. En
important
estas
data
primeras
that's
tres
of relevance
intervenciones
for
hemos
the
escuchado
international
escenarios
community.
muy
During the three
distintos,
participations
pero se han
we've
tocado
heard, we've
temas
had
muy
the
relevantes también,
opportunity to
como
listen
es
to three different
el
cases
acceso,
and
digamos,
relevant
a la
cases,
representación
like
y
you
participación
mentioned,
política de
access,
manera igualitaria,
participation,
cuáles son las medidas
egalitarian
legales, pero
political
también que están
participation, the
tomando las
legal
autoridades
measures,
electorales,
and
sean
what the electoral
administrativas o
authorities have been
jurisdiccionales,
doing, whether if
para
they need
garantizar
to
este
administrate
acceso a la
justice
representación
or the
y también
jurisdiction,
incluso
and
casos
having
como
access
los que
to the
nos
proper
comparte ahora el
representation. There's
doctor
been
Penco, en donde
cases
se
that
tiene
have
que
been
acudir a la
discussed, as the one
sabiduría
that
de la
Mr. Penco just
jurisprudencia
mentioned,
del
in
órgano
which you have
electoral
to
para
go to
resolver
the
una
wisdom
situación
of case law and the
prácticamente
essence
sin
and spirit
precedentes
of
o por lo
law.
menos
when there's unprecedented cases.
So
So you think about the likelihood of how to deliberate when there's a tie between candidates and the population has cast their votes. How do you solve such a matter? I remind those who follow our streaming via YouTube that we're receiving your questions via the TE International email that you see it there. It's the .mx email. Send all your questions so we can share the questions with our keynote speakers. Without further ado, we're going to listen to our Bolivian counterpart, Mr. Gustavo Avila, the president in duty. Mr. Avila will share his experience in the next 10 minutes. Thank you, doctor. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you from Bolivia. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to salute all the members and everyone who organized this event. But I also like to salute all our colleagues who have been here sharing their practices from their countries. Now it's my turn to participate with you all, sharing the Bolivian experience. I've prepared my slideshows. If you could share my slideshows, please. The name in reality is what you see. We'd like to use, well, the integrity of elections and resiliency of democracies in Bolivia, lessons learned and challenges. The heading of my slideshow is not far away from the reality of the election process. We have proven that in reality, to have the proper credibility amidst the elections held is that we've organized our elections preserving the integrity of these. We have administrated 3 election processes that have been concurrent, continuous, simultaneous. The judiciary, the first, second, third round of the elections have been held, and right now we're in the sub-elections 2026. This process has led us to introduce and demonstrate that we are a resilient democracy in Bolivia, considering all the crises that we've been suffering. The economic, social, political, and justice complexities have been part of it. But let me share some of the clear electoral processes that we've had the capacity to administrate during our management or administration. Next slide, please. In the institutional role, Bolivia has specific characteristics which are different compared to our brother and sister countries. In the electoral process, we have 2 functions which are essentials. We're the ones that really administrate the electoral process, but that also administrates the jurisdiction during the elections. It's the Electoral Supreme Tribunal of Bolivia that oversees this all. So we have a context throughout the electoral process. So the first context is, in 2 decades, there's a significant alternation that's been significant. During the last 20 years, there was a reigning party in power, but there's a change that does transcend, that shows and proves that there's going to be other political stakeholders participating. Those political stakeholders have been capable of strengthening or relating themselves strongly to the elections. We have polarized societies, a lack of information, we lack coordination. These new stakeholders or political stakeholders had interacted and worked with us with a clear objective. They wanted to misinform what was happening throughout the electoral process. So our task was very important. We continued the process of elections with the judiciary that's been attacked, greatly attacked, terribly attacked. And you've heard this about what's happened. The judiciary and the election process is there. We open brackets. We're the first country that elected the authorities of the judiciary through popular vote. The second country was our neighboring brother, Mexico. So there was intention of the elections being held, and the process or the calendar had been altered. So amidst the elections in the first or second round of general elections, our main task was to stop the attacks that our justice had been suffering. Next slide, please. We had faced important challenges and achievements. First of all, what's fundamental in Bolivia is the roster. The electoral roster in Bolivia is very important. This would affect the credibility of our elections. What did we do? We built a strategy to build our communication strategy with international allies, or with allies. I mean, we contacted TikTokers, influencers, means to show that we're solid as an electoral roster. But after many years, we opened that list, that roster. We invited independent auditors. We wanted biometric data to help us measure the members who participated in the vote through the roster. We wanted these other parties to audit us. We didn't receive any negative feedback regarding the roster, the electoral roster. This allowed us to continue our elections being strong. Something that's characterized us as one of the strong administration. We were capable of developing a transmission of preliminary results of the elections created by the members of the Bolivian bodies that allowed us to share immediate results. At 8, we closed election days and we received the results. We measured 95% of the results by 8 p.m. on E-Day or election day. This guaranteed that we're going to be we were a trustworthy authority, a credible authority. We had decided to broaden the electoral scope. We opened the doors to all the observers, missions to everyone, international or national observers, to verify the hard work that we were carrying out as an electoral body. We had over 17 missions and welcomed over 17 missions of observers, over 19 missions of the nation's observers. It's one of the longest list of observers that were admitted to Bolivia to see the elections. So we worked along with them to verify every step of the process throughout our elections. These efforts have led us to continuously work and overcome any other challenges that the judiciary had been facing before. So we were capable of immediately reacting and continue working hard for the circuit of elections as part of our mission. Next slide, please. In transparency with the electoral controls, we have applied something that's extremely important. Amidst the crisis that Bolivia was living, it was the administration of justice. So we've had the capacity to open work tables, open for dialogue. We composed 4 tables in which we had different dialogues with different members of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary branch members participated in those important tables. We called in the other stakeholders. Members of the Constitutional Tribunal were part of the debate. We had members of the judiciary, and they just had they altered our electoral calendar, and they made them commit themselves. So they subscribed an instrument, whether it's the judiciary, legislative, or the judiciary branch. They could not affect the calendar of the elections to be held. So that was our calling. All the stakeholders that were invited joined those tables. National and international authorities were present, and we signed off that instrument or agreement. But the executive body throughout this economic crisis try to move forward. We needed to achieve those levels of commitment to execute what we needed to execute and use the resources properly and had the right strategy. We had this forces of government working together without receiving negative feedback. We exhausted the measures that we had. We have open data for observers. We had specific protocols for observers to be part of it. We had all the political forces and parties involved. So that was essential during election days. We submitted the roster to all the political parties there to verify that we didn't have any foreigners participating in the roster to vote. We didn't have in that roster members that could not have the right to vote. So that was verified by all the stakeholders that were examining it. Amongst the challenges in our jurisdictions, I can tell you that in reality, we have faced challenges, as I've said. We have increased the cases filed in challenging elections. So there's an open door for the administration of justice that was motivated to analyze under scrutiny. Yes, all our elections, we received around 50 lawsuits, cases of elections that were challenged. It was complex. We were going through a lot of pressure in social media and public polls. What we had done and the institutional response was immediate. We had case law, clear case law. We worked directly with different bodies of justice, the Supreme Court, the ministries, the prosecution. We coordinated all our efforts to coordinate and fight. and really guarantee the rule of law amidst the elections. You know, we have multiple tier elections. We're very strict. We had the electoral case law in the case of re-election. We have been very clear and very concrete, very solid. We have implemented case law, constitutional law about reviewing of the process. We coordinated everything technically between the plenary sessions of the tribunals of the Supreme Courts or the electoral tribunals in different regions that we have in different levels to solve any criteria that might be different to the standard criteria, to solve the problems, to obtain valuable results amidst the electoral process. That has allowed us to simply not have one lawsuit filed from different political bodies that wanted to halt the elections that we held. Next slide, please. We have, in a very frontal way, fought disinformation. It's important to understand that in our countries, and Bolivia is not an isolated case, we've had a case of fake news or disinformation, and that has led us to build a coalition. We have worked with the media, and the citizenship really create like platforms to fight fake news. And with the help of our Peruvian counterparts, we have built a coalition to fight that dirty war and the fake news streams through social media. That's a counter effect, counterintelligence they're serving to simply tackle fake news that's affecting our electoral circuit and process. This has been implemented at national level. In the second round, we had also implemented this in the 9 territories of our country. The report, the executive report, has led us to identify fake news, fake content that affected candidates that had a name to disinform and affect the elections. We have continuously seen the negative news around the elections that we've held. We have trained ourselves along with the citizenship so they can watch over what's happening. We have made the process of elections viral content, so we are all informed about what's happening there. Next slide, please. We have in reality built a great project to coordinate our efforts with the judiciary branch. We work hand in hand with the different bodies of justice, the Constitutional Tribunal, the Supreme authorities, and the prosecution. We have an institutional strategy. We have opened working tables for dialogue. Everyone is empowered to strengthen the electoral process as a clear objective. We have had to make sure that our reports are there. We're highly engaged. We're committed to guarantee that the elections take place as they should. We're here to protect the guiding principles that are part of all the elections that are heard. There's no violation of the principle of execution in Bolivia. That's what we're doing. We're protecting those principles to hold our elections in 2026. That gives us certainty, and it gives our elections certainty. The results are those. We have a process. We respect the calendar according to the elections in all the phases of the process. Next slide, please. If you speak about including women, our youth, and minorities in Bolivia through its legislation, we have given results in reality. 52% of women participate in all public positions. We're in compliance with gender parity, gender quota. And we respect the participation of our youth and minorities, not only throughout the process of the elections, but also the positions held in office with the new deputies, new government officials, senators, and others. I think I just ran out of time. My conclusions. We believe that for the development of the electoral process, if we coordinate our efforts properly amongst all the apparatus of government, we have to make sure that the bodies that administrate justice and the electoral authorities are independent, unbiased, unskewed. And criminal justice system is there is fundamental for us to watch over and develop properly all the election processes. Thank you very much. I'm open and here for you if you want to solve any question or have doubts. Thank you very much, Dr. Avila. Thank you very much, sir. We're going to receive questions for the representative of the Supreme Tribunal of Bolivia. There are some points that are the same as others suffered in other countries, but we're going to see what's happening in the latter section of this session. I thank Ms.
Concord
Catherine
Project
Elena
y
for
ex vicepresidenta
joining
de la
us.
Fundación Internacional
Concord
para los
Project
Sistemas
representative
Electorales,
and
que a
CEO,
continuación haga
representing
uso de
other
la voz,
systems or
no para
electoral
hablar de
systems.
las
Here,
elecciones de su
please,
país,
Ms. Elena,
sino más bien para
take
hablar
the
de las
microphone,
elecciones
not to
en
speak
los
about the
Estados
elections in your
Unidos
country,
este
but
año,
speak about the elections that will be
tuvieron
held
lugar y
in the
fueron muy
U.S. in this
importantes
country.
también
The
por sus
elections in the U.S. were
implicaciones
very
en la
important because
configuración
it has an
política de aquel país.
impact
Por favor,
politically in
adelante,
its
Catherine,
political
tiene el uso de la
configuration. Thanks,
voz.
Ms. Catherine. The microphone is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto, and thank you to my very dear friends at the Federal Electoral Tribunal of Mexico and Chief Justice Monica Soto for organizing this panel. I'm really delighted to take part, and I'm truly honored to be in such distinguished company of judges and presidents of electoral commissions who are protecting democracy across this region, but also across the world. So I'm honored to be here. I am going to touch on some of the challenges in the US elections this year, but I have also been very happy to hear about some of the positive aspects, the gender parity in Mexico, the innovations with technology in Chile and others. And it's nice to be reminded of those positive developments as well. So in the United States, obviously we are in an off-year contest this year in 2025, which means that elections were only in a few states and cities as opposed to federal elections, although there were a few seats in Congress that were up for special elections to fill vacancies, either for a candidate that had gone to join the Trump administration or left Congress for other reasons. But primarily, these have been state-level elections this year. The other interesting part about the elections, of course, in November is that they came in the midst of a US federal government shutdown, which we may face again in the end of January next year, leading up to the midterms in the US. So it is quite a politically volatile environment here as well. The most high-profile races that we had this year were for governor races in the state of Virginia and New Jersey, as well as a high-profile mayoral race in New York. And if you think back a number of months, there were some other high-profile elections, particularly in May, for a state Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin, where we saw some significant expenditure, including from Elon Musk in that particular race. And I'll come back to those judicial elections in just a second. But just to note that there were other lower profile state legislative contests, other judicial elections and other mayoral and local offices across the country, but of course did not get the same kind of coverage that these other high profile ones did. I will touch very briefly on the results, but then I want to turn and highlight 4 other issues that I think are important to watch from 2025 and then looking ahead to 2026 and 2028 in the US. So first, just on the results, as I'm sure folks have seen, Democrats came out strongly in these off-cycle elections, particularly winning the governor races in Virginia, the first time Virginia will have a woman governor, and then also coming in strong with the governor's office in New Jersey. So in Virginia now, they have flipped completely to have all of the top roles in the Virginia administration, as well as the legislature in the state, which is the same now in New Jersey, where they strengthened their position. Of course, there was a lot of media coverage of the mayoral race in New York City, a 3-way race where Mamdani, a Democrat or self-identified Democrat socialist, won a very high-profile mayoral race there. Generally, with all of the other races across the countries, this year Democrats did perform well, particularly in large and medium-sized cities. Looking at the polling around these elections, you have to look at this election compared to previous off-year or off-cycle benchmarks. And we have seen that Democrats have tended to outperform this year those benchmarks, particularly focusing on economy and healthcare, as well as some of the erosion of democratic norms has been sort of the focus of candidates here. Just quickly, I wanted to mention about turnout because I think it's interesting. Two key factors here for this off-cycle year. Youth turnout rose significantly compared to the last comparable off year. So it increased quite a lot compared to the 2021 governor's races. And then secondly, women voters were quite central to some of the results we saw in these elections. Polling showed, particularly for the governor races, that women in nearly every age group and ethnic group backed Democrats at higher rates than men in this election. So something interesting to watch going into 2026 and 2028, bearing in mind that President Trump was not on the ballot this year, and these were not federal races. So you have to think about that when you look at some of the polling around youth and women and the changes since last year. So I personally think it can be hard to predict too much just yet, but that's some of the data coming out from this year. So 4 key issues that I think are interesting, particularly for this audience. The first being, as many of the other distinguished panelists have talked about, the election-related litigation. And here in the US, as with most years, there has continued to be a lot of election litigation. This year in 2025, the focus has been less on contesting the results of elections and more on litigation around the rules that are governing the process, whether it be voting itself, mail ballots, and redistricting in particular. Just to note a few of the key issues, and I will dive into one, there has been a lot of litigation around President Trump's executive order from March on elections, which looks to require that ballots are both cast and received by election day if they are to be counted. There has been litigation around that. There's also been a lot of litigation at the state level around a lot of different types of voting laws, including around voter ID, mail ballot procedures, proof of citizenship, maintenance of voter lists, and a range of other types of litigation. And it's the fact that there is this state level election litigation is important because it connects to the judicial elections that we have here in the US, and I'll talk about that in a second. 2 other issues to watch in terms of litigation: campaign finance. There will be a case in front of the Supreme Court in the coming days regarding limits on parties coordinating with candidates in terms of spending. And then lastly, and an issue I wanted to turn to, the second out of the 4, is of course redistricting. So I'm sure folks have seen in the news that there is a wave in the United States at the moment of unprecedented mid-decade redistricting activity. Normally, redistricting takes place every 10 years after the census, but multiple states have been looking to redraw their districts, particularly ahead of the midterm federal elections next year, to maintain or gain control of Congress. So just to name a few, Texas, Republicans enacted a new congressional map to create up to 5 additional Republican-leaning districts. I'm sure everyone saw California responding to that, and voters in the recent elections in November approving a ballot measure to override the Independent Commission's map and draw a new map that would favor 5 more seats for Democrats, essentially counteracting the action in Texas. Missouri has also finalized a new map. And there are ongoing court battles over these new maps in at least 15 states, including all 3 of the ones I just mentioned. So this is an ongoing issue, and it's going to be ongoing into 2026, leading up to the midterms, both at the state level and all the way up to the Supreme Court. So this may reshape American elections, and honestly, it's very difficult to predict how this redistricting arms race, if you will, is actually going to play out. So that's the second issue to watch. The third one is judicial elections. And it has been so interesting watching Mexico, having the privilege of being in Mexico earlier this year for your judicial elections, and being able to take that experience and look back here in the US. Now, state courts in the US, they decide about 95% of all cases across all areas of law in the United States. So they're very consequential. And nearly 9 out of 10 state judges in the US must stand for election at some point in their career. So it's more widespread, I think, than people sometimes realize. 2025 again was a reasonably quiet year, but there were 15 state appellate seats on the ballot and 5 state Supreme Court seats. I mentioned Wisconsin earlier, of course, which was an extremely high-profile battle in May this year to elect a new justice of that court that could change the balance of the court between liberal or conservative judges. Without going into too much detail about the judicial elections, each state does take a slightly different approach. Some of these races are partisan elections, some are not, and some are just retention elections where the voter will vote yes or no to retain a judge. So they are different to those taking place in Mexico. They're also different because in the United States, judges, campaign finance is part of judicial elections, different again than it is to Mexico. So it's a very interesting process. The second high-profile one was just in November as well in Pennsylvania, where there were 3 state Supreme Court judges up for retention election, and there was a lot of money and a lot of campaigning and some disinformation around that race to try and skew the balance of judges on that court. Now, what's interesting about these races, as I mentioned earlier, is they are becoming more and more prominent because these state Supreme Court courts are hearing more and more contentious cases, including cases about voting rights, as well as abortion, campaign finance, many other issues. So I predict that they're only going to become more high profile and more contentious in 2026 and 2028, when 33 states in the US will be holding Supreme Court elections. That's 40% of all state Supreme Court seats over the next 3 years will be up for election. So it's definitely something to watch. And one study that I have seen has shown that 90% of voters believe that campaign spending in the United States affects judicial decision making. So the decisions that judges are actually making. And then the last issue that I wanted to mention is political violence. And I think looking at the US, certainly researchers, academics have been documenting a rise in threats and attacks since about 2016. One academic database tracking politically motivated assaults this year recorded roughly 150 of those attacks in just the first half of this year. That's almost double the same number from 2024. And this, you remember, is an off-cycle election season this year. So this shows that not just the threats, but actual attacks are climbing in the United States, and is certainly a big concern looking ahead to, again, the midterms next year. And maybe just to leave on a positive note, having highlighted some of the challenges and some of the issues to watch from this year and looking ahead to next year, we have seen a lot of strong positive activity from election administrators, from judges that are involved in election litigation in the United States, taking threats seriously, planning for security, focusing on upholding the law and the rights of voters. I think that's something that's heartening in the US and something to watch. But many of the other issues that I have raised will be incredibly interesting as we look ahead in the United States to 2026. So I will stop there and look forward to a conversation.
Muchísimas gracias, Catherine Elena. Nuevamente encontramos similitudes
Thank you very
y
much,
esa es
Catherine and Elena. We
una de
find
las ventajas
similarities when you
de estos
compare what's
ejercicios,
happening
en
here.
donde,
One
por
of the
ejemplo, las
advantages of
elecciones
comparing,
presidenciales,
I mean, the
sean de la
judiciary's
naturaleza que
elections
sean y en el
have a
formato
specific
que cada
nature. They have a specific
soberanía
format.
elija
Each
llevarlas a
sovereign
cabo,
country
son
decides
más
how
frecuentes de lo
to
que
process their
pensábamos y en ese
elections.
sentido hay
But the
más
contrasts,
espacio
I mean,
para
are
aprender
there. I mean,
mutuamente
there's
a
more
través de
room
la
for all
cooperación
of us to learn mutually.
internacional,
We have international mutual
incluso en la diversidad de
cooperation.
sistemas
There's
federales,
diverse
sistemas
systems, federal systems,
centralizados,
there's
con lo
centralized
cual
systems.
me permito ahora
Out
introducir
of
la
this, I'll
participación del
allow
doctor
myself to
Patrick
introduce
Sensburg,
or present
que
Mr.
como ya lo
Patrick
había anticipado,
Salzburg.
no solamente fue
Mr.
el
Salzburg was
presidente,
not
digamos,
only the
para
chair,
ponerlo en términos más
he was not only
simples,
the chair, just to
del órgano
simplify, but
parlamentario encargado de
he
la resolución
is
de disputas
the chair
electorales,
of the
sino que
body that
actualmente
issues
y desde
resolutions
entonces ha
regarding any
acompañado a la Red
dispute or
Mundial de Justicia
challenging
Electoral,
cause.
presidiendo
So
su
Salzburg is
observatorio
also the
de
president
redes
of the
sociales en
Observatory on
paralelo a sus
Social
actividades
Network,
académicas,
and
y quien nos
simultaneously he's
compartirá
working as a
en este
scholar in the
momento lo que sucedió
academia.
en Alemania,
Salzburg is going
los
to tell us
comicios que se
exactly what's
celebraron en su
happening in the
país.
elections held
Adelante,
in
doctor
Germany.
Sensburg, tiene
Please
usted el
go
uso de la
ahead,
palabra.
Mr. Salzburg. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And excuse me that I came so late. Just came directly from my lectures. So the students had the right to hear the lectures, and now I'm very happy and pleased to be here with you. To tell you everything about the German elections wouldn't be possible in a half day because the times are changing, of course, and that is also related to the elections in Germany. The political landscape is changing, not just in Germany. I think in many European countries we see right-wing, right extremist parties on the scene, which have connections, of course, to UK, to USA, to the Trump administration, to advisors and spin doctors of Trump. So we see also a change in the landscape. But before I go into some details, I want to introduce a little bit the election law in Germany. And the electoral law is quite, I don't want to say unique, what is unique in the world, but has a background. So Germany has got a personalized proportional representation system, which is a combination of direct vote and a proportional representation system. So in Germany, you have got in a federal election 2 votes. I come back to that later. When we look in all countries of the world, we can see that we have got 250 different electoral systems in the world, around about 250 different electoral systems worldwide. But all of them are more or less a combination of a directing vote system, where you vote a candidate and the candidate with the most votes is elected, and a proportional representation where you vote parties, party lists, and all these kind of electoral systems are a combination of these 2 possibilities normally. So Germany is also a combination of these 2 possibilities. So in Germany, we try to learn from the past because, as you all know, Germany, I always say Germany started 2 world wars, and the weakness of the electoral system to make that possible to get extremists in power is one of the reasons why we structured our electoral system, learning out of the situation, especially in the time in the 20th century after the First World War and before the Second World War. It's called Weimarer Republik, a young democracy in Germany. Democracy was young, it was weak, the electoral system was not very strong, there were not many possibilities to secure it, to safeguard it. So democracy made everything possible. In the elections, all candidates, all parties were able to start and to run. And with a small majority, you could elect a party and you could form party groups. So after the Second World War, we designed our electoral system in that way that stability for democracy, as a safeguard for democracy. So our electoral system is mainly based on the learnings from the past and has one very important pillar, which means safeguarding democracy. That is the main target of the electoral system. So, knowing this, when we come later to scrutiny of elections or the question about the federal constitutional court, everything has to be observed or seen through the glasses of safeguarding democracy, which is very important for us with our history in Germany. So, to be very brief in the system, I can describe it as a combination, as I said. When we had our last elections in 2025 in Germany, 60 million people were able to vote. 60 million. In Germany, we have a little bit more, 83 million citizens. So 60 million had the right to vote when you're older than 18 on the federal level. In the state level or in the local level, it's lower. It's 16, the age where you are able to vote. But in the federal level, you have to be 18 to vote. So 60 million people had the right to vote. There is no special barrier or anything where you have to register. You are already registered as a voter. You get a letter. With that letter, you can go and give up your vote. No burdens, nothing administrative. You can directly go with your passport and your invitation letter and you go. And there are no cases, maybe one or two, which is 60 million, it's not a lot, where people don't get a letter, but everything is in media. If you don't have a letter weeks before the election, you can directly go to your city and local administration, said, I got no invitation to the elections, and then you will get one, or you get explained why you're maybe not allowed to vote in a federal election because maybe you're not German or EU citizen. So in the end, 16 million citizens were able to vote, and we all have two votes. The first vote is to vote the direct candidate of your constituency. In Germany, we have 299 constituencies. So the one who got the most votes in the end, the highest percentage of the votes, is directly elected to the parliament. 299. The second, which is a system, second group of 299 are coming over the proportional system. So, with other words, the second half of the members of parliament are voted because of a proportionality representation system. So, you vote with the second vote a party. For example, if you vote with the first vote a candidate from the Conservative Party, and with a second vote, the percentage, one from the Social Democrats, you split your votes. The Conservative is maybe directly elected, but gets a low percentage for the party, and the Social Democrats get a high percentage, but they don't have direct candidate. That can lead to the situation that you sometimes have lots of direct candidates for one party, but maybe a higher percentage even, which is possible, for another party, but they never get direct candidates. So it can differ. It's not intentionally have the same outcome. So that means that sometimes you have 299 direct voted candidates, of course, but then in the percentage, a totally different picture, which means sometimes you have more because of the percentage of one party in the parliament than directly voted with the first vote, which leads to the consequences that the German parliament is growing larger and larger. Normally, it should have 299 two times, which is 598 members of parliament, but we had in the last periods sometimes 730, 780, so many members of parliaments. So this is one of the main critics we have in media and in the public. The parliament is growing too large. We sometimes compare it with the Chinese People's Congress. So people say we're getting too many members of parliament, which is not acceptable. the problem is that our constitutional court is very keen on the situation that a vote must have the same weight. Of course, vote has the same weight, but the outcome, that is important. If you vote with your second vote for a party, you should be clear what it means, how much influence your vote have. And sometimes we have a situation that it differs. First vote for the direct candidate and the proportional vote for the party. And then we had the situation that more and more members of parliament got in the parliament. So we changed the electoral law that we say not more than 630 are allowed. That means in the last election we had early in this year, we had direct candidates, to be precise, 23, who had won the constituency because they got the most votes. But the party itself didn't get enough votes for the percentage that they were not allowed to join the parliament, 23, because it was covered with 630. So direct voted MPs are not able to join the parliament because their party didn't get enough votes as a party on this with a second vote. So now you see our problems. We have lots of problems in the system itself. We try, on one hand, to stabilize democracy, that elections are a factor for stabilizing Germany as a country, democracy, the party system, the institutions like parliament, second chamber, and all this, which is the main learning from our history. Don't stabilize because you're trying to bring every political voice into a parliament. Better stabilize the system. And on the other hand, our constitutional court wants each voter to have the same outcome of a vote, to be able to vote for a party and then be quite sure that his vote leads in the end to a member in the parliament. So to bring this together, this is a problem. So we have structural decisions. We have structural decisions about how many members of parliament. Is there what we have, a barrier, let me say it that way, a kind percentage when one party is not able to get in the parliament. We call it so-called 5% threshold. So if a party don't reaches more than 5% of the votes, they are not allowed to be in the parliament. So when you have just 4.98, like one party in the last elections, all votes got lost for the party. And if they don't have no direct candidates, they are not in the parliament, even if they have 4.98% of all votes of 60 million. They don't go over the 5% threshold, which is also a structural question. Should you have something? The European Parliament hasn't it. So you have parties with one member or two or three members in the parliament. We don't have that. So votes got lost. And that's a discussion that our constitutional court is having since years, because smaller parties go to the constitutional court and say votes got lost. What can we do in this? So we had many basic questions of the electoral law that the constitutional courts deals with, and not problems in the concrete election. So how is the system works in Germany with scrutiny in the elections, with the review of the elections. So we have a very maybe strange sounding system for your ears, because in the first instance, the parliament itself reviews the election. So that means we have a committee in the parliament, Committee of Scrutiny of Elections, where I was chair of the committee, that is observing, reviewing the done election. So where I was voted by myself, for example, and we are reviewing that election as a committee of the just elected parliament. So traditionally, over all political parties, normally it makes decisions in unanimity. So there are no fights between the parties from the left to the right. We're really dealing with mistakes in the electoral process, which means that anything that could happen and go wrong are on our table, because people can go with each case, with each problem, with anything that went wrong during the election process to our committees. They have a period of time when they can do it. And in this period of time, they can do their, or they can bring their opinion of violations against electoral right to our committee. For example, access for handicapped people to the election. When there are steps in front of a election place, normally a school or something like that, which shouldn't be, it is a mistake in the electoral process. So it's an objective mistake, and then we are trying to correct it in the next election. So we say it's an objective mistake, but it doesn't lead to a new election in that constituency. This is a second point. The question if the objective mistake could have had a different outcome in the total election in that constituency. For example, if a whole group would be excluded or not able to vote, then it could be, if the group is large enough, have an outcome in the question if one candidate or another candidate is elected. But if you don't have that as a possibility, then it is an objective mistake, no problem. And we try to correct that and inform the electoral bodies on a local basis to do it better next time. But it has no consequences in annulling the election or doing another election or whatever. So in the end, it has two steps. Registering an objective unlawful electoral process in a constituency, and then asking the question, what outcome could it have? Could it have the influence so hard that a different outcome would be possible? Just if this is possible, there could be, first step, a new counting of the votes, or as a second step, maybe redone of the election in one constituency to have a new election in the whole country. It would be very seldom, because then you would have had a mistake that the whole electoral in the country would have come or lead to a different outcome. We never had that. What we had exactly in the election 2021, especially in Berlin, or just in Berlin, where a lot of mistakes happened. For example, not enough ballots. There were constituencies who had not enough paper ballots for the voting to make crosses on. There were lots of voters in front, the rooms, the places, and they ran out of papers, the official papers. So they had to send people home. Okay, that could lead, when you have enough people waiting, and there were hundreds waiting outside, to a totally different outcome. Second problem in that election was there were so many people queuing, and they were so slow. Normally 6 o'clock in the evening, the rooms closed. And they are still queuing, and they said, oh, we let it open until 7 or 8, until everybody had the chance to vote. But the first forecasts and then the first results were already in the media. So it could change the people's opinion, what they vote, if they watch on their mobile phone when they're still queuing the first results of the election. Then they will say, oh, then I vote better some other parties. So we had so many mistakes in the field of these examples that in Berlin we had some constituencies for the first time where we really had to do a second voting because the election were annulled in these constituencies. But which is very, very seldom. We had just 2021 in that election, because they were in Berlin, so many mistakes. And that, in the end, came to the result that in 3 constituencies, other candidates in the end got MPs than in the first round where the mistakes were made. So
I think we need to close now. Thank you.
Sorry?
We have 1 more minute, please.
Yes. I come to the end. So these are just examples what you see we are dealing with. We have not special groups who are excluded to the elections. We had one constitutional court decision of people with mental disease who were excluded without checking what kind of mental disease. That was one issue, but never it led to a second election because we thought the votes will go to all parties in the same proportionality. But that was a decision. But all decisions are very structural into the electoral law itself. And it all leads to our opinion that we have to safeguard democracy by election. And one idea at the end for the discussion. We talk a lot about electoral law in Germany, in front of this background. But my opinion, in the end, it's not the electoral law. You can have the best electoral law in a country if the acceptance of the people is not there. Acceptance of the people, trust in the system, how the votes were counted, trust in the results, in the administration. That is the core figure. But because there are many, many countries who have a much better electoral law than Germany, but there is no trust in the system. In Germany, you can vote with a pencil, and nobody believes that somebody uses a rubber and changes it. So in the end, it's of course the electoral law, but if you don't have a trust in the system, in the administration, and in the way elections are done, then it don't work, even if you have the best electoral law, and that is what we're trying to combine in Germany. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas
One
gracias
minute.
al profesor Sensburg por
Thank
su
you very much,
intervención.
Professor Selsberg, for
Y
having participated. Thank you so
ahora
much, sir.
en la moderación nos encontramos en un conflicto
Now, as a
porque muy raro, como
moderator, I'm in a
ustedes han hecho en
conflict.
su
On one
capacidad
hand, as you've
de
said,
autoridades electorales,
your
debo
authorities, your electoral
privilegiar
authorities,
la
I must
previsibilidad y ofrecerles un
tell
espacio
you that
suficiente
we
para
need
que
to
hagan
give
una
you all
intervención
enough
final,
time to
pero
participate
tenemos el
and
reloj
give
en
your
contra.
closer
Entonces les
statements,
pediré que en
but
su última
the
intervención
the
sean lo
clock
más
is against
breves
us. So
posible.
in your
Tenemos
participations,
varias
please be as brief
preguntas,
as possible. We
es
have
un
many
reto
listed
agruparlas,
questions
pero
here.
me parece que
It's a
podríamos
challenge
tener
to
tres
group them
líneas
all. I think
generales
that we
y que
can have
coinciden con lo
three
que hemos
general
escuchado el día de
lines
hoy, con
that would
independencia de la
lead us to agree
naturaleza de
with
la
what we've
elección,
heard today. The
del país en
independence of
donde se
the
celebró
elections
esa
of the
elección.
sovereign
Hay
country where
tres
you
capas,
celebrate
una
the elections.
capa que es
There's
el
three
marco
layers:
jurídico,
one,
el
two,
marco
three, the legal
institucional,
frame, the institutional frame,
digamos, las autoridades
the
responsables de
authorities, the
organizar,
responsible
calificar,
authorities that
juzgar la
organize,
elección. La
qualify,
segunda
and judge
capa
the
tiene que
elections. The
ver
second
con
layer in the
la cultura
stratigraphy is
política,
correlated to
la
political
tradición
culture,
histórica de cada
the
país, cómo esta
historical
tradición está
tradition of each
influyendo
nation, the
de distintas
tradition, what's
maneras en cómo se
customary,
están
and
celebrando
how
sus
it
comicios.
influences
Y
differently,
la
and how
tercera,
people
que tiene que
celebrate
ver
their
con
elections. The
nuevos
third point
retos
that has to do with
asociados
new
a
challenges,
una
which are
participación
associated
igualitaria que
to an
refleje
egalitarian
verdaderamente la
participation
estructura de
that
nuestras
really
sociedades
reflects the structure of
democráticas
our democratic
y
societies.
contra
And
un enemigo común que
against
ustedes
a
han
common
descrito
enemy that you
como
have
ya sea
described.
desinformación,
There might be a lack of
contaminación del espacio
information, fake
informativo, ataques
information,
incluso en
contaminant
contra
pollution
de la
of the
propia gestión
news,
electoral
attacks of
o
the electoral
en el caso de las
administration,
autoridades
or in
jurisdiccionales,
the case of
del
jurisdictional
juzgamiento de las
authorities,
elecciones.
wrongfully
Esto se
judging
agudiza en
elections.
un
This is
ambiente en
acute
donde los periodos informativos son mucho más
when there's
cortos
like
e imparten su
the
labor. De
information
esa manera,
streams slowly.
en esas tres
So
capas,
in those
¿qué
three
papel pueden
layers or those
desempeñar
three
la
phases,
justicia
which
y
are
la
the roles that
administración
justice can
electoral
play
en la
and
promoción de una
electoral justice can
participación
play
política más
when fostering
igualitaria?
political
Número
participation that's
dos,
egalitarian?
¿qué
Number two,
reglas ustedes consideran o
which are the
sistemas
rules or
electorales en los
electoral
que han descrito
systems
favorecen
that
a
you've
una
already
mayor
described?
y
Which are the
mejor
systems that would
participación política
favor
que refleje la
greater
voluntad
political
ciudadana
participation that
y
really
la
mirrors the
representación
citizenship's
conducente de acuerdo
will,
a la expresión del voto en las urnas?
as well as the
Y número
proper
tres,
expression or the right expression of
¿cuáles
the
han
vote
sido las
in the
buenas
urn or
prácticas
in the voting
internacionales que
ballots?
ustedes han
Which are the
identificado
best
para enfrentar estos retos?
practices that
¿Qué
you have
esquemas
detected
de
to
cooperación o
tackle
cuál
the
es la
challenges?
importancia de
Which are the
mantener
schemes of
informada a la
cooperation,
ciudadanía de
plans of
nuestras audiencias como lo
cooperation
estamos
to
haciendo el día
keep
de
the
hoy,
citizenship
en
informed
función de
as
la
we're
cooperación internacional para
doing today?
encontrar buenas
In
prácticas?
function
Sé
of
que
the
no me
best
pueden contestar
practices.
las
We
tres.
want to find the
Les
best
ruego que
practices, but
elijan una de
I know that
ellas
you can't
o una
answer all the
síntesis
three
de las tres
questions. Just
en los,
succinctly
vamos a
answer
decir, dos
one of the
minutos
three
y medio que
questions in
tendrá
2 minutes
cada
or
quien
2.5 minutes that each
para
and everyone
expresarse.
will
Si les
have.
parece bien, a menos de que me lo indiquen con su mano,
So tell
iniciaremos
me,
en
raise
orden
your hands
inverso
if need
a
be. We're
como
going to
tuvimos las
start in the
participaciones, iniciando
reverse the
con el
order.
profesor
We're going to
Sensburg.
start with Professor
Adelante,
Salzberg.
profesor, una
Professor, could you
respuesta
give us some
rápida, por
feedback
favor.
or a brief response or comment, sir?
Yeah, it relates a little bit to my last idea of my speech. Of course, I would try to make a very good electoral law system, which means not too complicated. A law should be simple, should be understandable, not just for jurists. So to make clear and brief and understandable, but to do more effort in the system, in the administrative system, and in the trust in the system. If we don't spend more energy in the acceptance, in the trust, in our bodies who are involved, then we see a lot of discussion, a lot of discussion in social media, a lot of stories which can weaken our system, even if it's organized very strong. And this is what I see in social media, also in Germany and in Europe. The other right-wing parties, for example, they're not trying to bring a new law system into our country. They're trying just to weaken the actual system by telling stories. By telling stories, votes are not counted, or people couldn't go there. So from my point of view, it's very hard to say for a jurist, because we all want to create new law and to do something like that. But I think most of our electoral laws are good now. They are working since years, but people try to destroy the trust in our system, and we have to do everything by using checks of balances, by using transparency, by using participation, to create trust in the system. That is a core factor from my point of view.
Muchísimas gracias. La confianza como factor
Thank you very much, sir.
determinante,
Trust as a determinating factor, sir,
leyes, reglas
is
claras,
very
simples,
important. Clear
entendibles, no
rules,
solo para
clear,
juristas, sino
simple
también para la
rules that are
ciudadanía en general.
outlined for
Nos
everyone,
quedamos
not
con
just
eso,
for
doctor
jurists, but for
Sensburg.
the
Adelante,
citizenship in
Catherine y Elena,
general.
por favor.
Thank you, Mr. Salzberg. Miss Catherine Elena, please.
Thank you, Alberto, and I will agree with my colleague. There's no perfect election law, there's no perfect electoral system. One thing I will say, though, is it is good for countries to constantly refine those systems over time in response to some of the new challenges that come along, as you suggest, Alberto. I have lived many years in the United States, but I am originally from New Zealand, and we are currently going through a new process now, looking at refining little elements, actually the opposite of Germany, maybe putting more seats in parliament. I think this refinement is good, but maybe not. The major changes can be disruptive. I would say two things, and I think, again, they just echo what other colleagues have said. Firstly, that democracies are made up of governing systems. Democracy is a governing system, but it's also a culture. You have to strengthen both of those things, and then you need to connect the two. I think that's incredibly important. And then secondly, with electoral integrity in particular, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that electoral integrity is not a feeling. People can talk about fraud, they can talk about fairness, all of that, all they like, but elections are made up of actions and decisions that leave a trace. And I think we need to give public access to all of the little components that make up electoral integrity so that people can feel it, and, well, not feel it, people can trust it themselves, as opposed to just believing that it is something amorphous that they can feel. It is something that can be determined and trusted.
Muchísimas gracias. Una reflexión sobre
Thank
la
you, ma'am, so much.
tangibilidad
Do
de
you
la
have
democracia. La
something to say
democracia
about how
como
tangible
algo que se
democracies
vive,
are?
no solamente
Thank you
algo
for
que se
saying that
intuye o se
democracy is a
siente.
tangible. It's not
Y
something that
un muy buen
you
punto
think of
también
and
sobre posibles direcciones opuestas
have
las
a
reformas, pero
feeling
que
of.
tienen el
But
mismo
you've
objetivo de
mentioned the
fortalecimiento
reforms, the
democrático.
objective,
Muchísimas gracias.
clarifying
Doctora
the fact
Elena,
that
se
we
ha
need to
disculpado
strengthen our
el
democracies. Thank you,
presidente en
Dr.
funciones del
Elena.
Tribunal Supremo Electoral
The
de Bolivia,
president of the
y por
Electoral
lo tanto le
Tribunal
pido al
of
presidente de la
Bolivia
Corte
excused
Electoral de
himself.
Uruguay,
Now
don
it's the turn
Wilfredo
of the
Penco, que haga
Uruguayan
uso de la voz.
president. Mr.
Adelante.
Wilfredo Penco will take the floor,
Muy
please.
bien.
President.
Como dije hoy, el Uruguay es un
As I've said today,
pequeño,
Uruguay is a very
con
small
una sociedad
country
homogénea y
with
con
a
una
homogeneous
cultura cívica
society,
consolidada
with
a lo
civic
largo de la
culture
historia.
that's solid
Para
throughout
eso es
our history.
importante
It's important.
ser fiel, ser leal
It's
a estos
important to be
principios
loyal,
que
to be
establecen las
faithful to the
bases de la
guiding
democracia
principles that
y de la
establish
participación
the
popular.
laws for us to cast votes, or
Tenemos
the
un
electoral
órgano
codes
electoral
for
de
popular
hace un
democracies
siglo
there. We have a
que ha
body that's been
consolidado
active for a
estos
century.
principios
That's a solid
y que ha procurado
apparatus
modernizarse,
that has safe
actualizarse,
kept this, and it's
responder
modern, it's
a la
updated.
realidad tecnológica de este siglo
We have the
XXI.
response
Y lo ha
mechanisms to
hecho
technically to
con ponderación,
respond
tratando
to
de
this
conciliar todas estas
century's
realidades.
technology. We
Y
try
por
to
supuesto,
conciliate and see all the
este trabajo
realities.
ha
And
tenido
overall, this
el
work
apoyo
has
del
received the
concierto
support
internacional
of
y
the
este tipo de
international
encuentros
stakeholders.
académicos
And this type of
son de gran
academia
necesidad, no solo porque
conferences
conocemos
or panels
realidades de
are
otros
extremely
países,
important
sino porque
because we get to
aprendemos
hear the
de esas
realities of other
realidades.
countries
En
and
ese
we
camino
learn from what we
vamos
hear in
hacia
other realities. So that's the path, and we're going to
Muchísimas
continue
gracias, presidente
down this
Penco,
path.
por recordarnos que
Thank
el
you,
suyo es un
President Penko,
país
for reminding us
pequeño
that
en
your
población,
country is
pero
a
grande en
small
su
country in
democracia,
population, but you
donde
have a
ya nos
great
relató en su
democracy,
primera
President Penko.
intervención los retos
In
que
your
también
first
enfrenta
reportership,
y
you
la
mentioned the
importancia de
challenges
contar
that you're
con un
facing
órgano
in
como el
your
que usted
one,
preside,
and the
que
fact
ofrezca
that you have
certidumbre y que
you're the
defienda no
chair
los
of the body,
principios
the
de unos
electoral body
u
that
otros en una contienda
you
electoral
take
dada,
care of
sino
and
los
watch over the
principios
rights of
de la
others, the
democracia misma.
lawfulness
Muchísimas
of
gracias,
democracy and the
presidente.
guiding principles of
Y
our
a continuación
democracies.
le
Thank you,
pido a
Mr.
la
President.
presidenta del Servicio
I
Electoral
ask the
chileno,
president of the
la doctora
Chilean
Pamela
Electoral
Figueroa, que haga
Services,
uso de
Ms.
la voz. Adelante, doctora, por
Pamela
favor.
Figueroa, please, ma'am. The microphone is
Chile
yours.
es un país con una larga
Chile
trayectoria
is a country with a
Tiene
great
altos niveles de
democratic
integridad
history with high
electoral, y
levels
eso
of
lo
electoral
vemos por
integrity
los
in
índices de
Chile.
integridad
We
electoral
see
a
that
nivel
because of
mundial,
the
donde Chile
indexes, the
se ha
global indexes
destacado, y
that measure
también
Chile and Chile
el órgano,
is a
el Servicio
highlight.
Electoral y el órgano
The electoral
jurisdiccional son
services
instituciones que
and the
gozan de
jurisdictional
alta
bodies
confianza
and
ciudadana.
the apparatus have a
Eso se
lot of
ha
trust
formado
from the
por instituciones que
citizenship.
son
That's
autónomas,
mentioned by
con un
autonomous
sistema donde hay muchos actores que
agencies
interactúan y que
systematically where
vigilan el
there's many
proceso.
stakeholders that
Pero también
interact
somos
and
muy
that watch over the
conscientes de que los
process.
problemas que afectan a
But
otros
we're very
países
mindful
chilenos
and aware
pueden
about the
afectar a
problems that
nosotros.
affect other
Y creo
countries and
que
what
por
can
eso es
affect
tan
us too.
importante la
That's why
cooperación
it's so
internacional.
important to have international
Algo
cooperation.
decía
That's
Kathy,
why
que
it's
me
so
parece que es
important. What
relevante, que
Kathy
la
said,
democracia
it's
nosotros
relevant
no
because
solo son instituciones, también es
democracy
la
is not just an
percepción que la
institution,
ciudadanía, el
is the
apego que la
perception of the
ciudadanía tiene a esas
citizenship,
instituciones,
is the
y
fact that
estamos en
the
un
citizenship
momento donde
looks
la
towards these
información y
agencies
los
or the
sistemas
apparatus to
informativos son
see
más
how the
complejos que
information
antes.
flows.
Entonces creo que hay que poner
Informatic
ojo en eso
systems are much
también,
more complex
en
than
que no
before,
solamente es
or
importante
computer
hacer el
science systems are
trabajo de
much
alto
more
estándar
complex
que
than before.
hacemos,
It's
sino
not just that
comunicar
we
a la
have to work
ciudadanía para que la
above the
ciudadanía
standard. We have to communicate and
fortalezca esa
transmit this to the
confianza y esa
citizenship above
valoración del sistema
standard to build
democrático.
trust, to build a democratic system.
Muchísimas gracias, presidenta. Con
Thank
la
you so much,
experiencia
Madam
centenaria
President.
del
Thank
Servicio
you for
Electoral y del
sharing
Tribunal
the
Calificador de
centennial
Elecciones en Chile,
experience of the
justamente
Chilean
esa consolidada también a través
apparatus
de la
of
acción de esas
elections. Thank you
instituciones,
for sharing your
una cultura
strengths through
política que
your
confía en los
institutions.
resultados, que
There's political
confía
culture
en
that trusts the
sus autoridades,
results, that
y
trusts in
subrayo
the
la última
authorities. And
parte.
I
No
highlight
están
the last
exentas
point.
de un
You're
clima
not exempt
informativo
from
complejo
a climate of
ante el cual tienen
communication that's
que
highly
actuar
complex.
en
Amidst this
ocasiones,
complex
pero
climate,
sin
you have to
duda deben
react
operar
in some
permanentemente en esas
occasions.
condiciones. Gracias
Without
por
doubt, you
recordarnos
have to
también la
continue
importancia de
your
la
operation
cooperación
under any
internacional en
conditions
ese
or these
sentido.
conditions.
Y
Thank
me
you for
gustaría
mentioning
cerrar con la
international
intervención de la
cooperation. And
magistrada
I would like
Mónica
to
Galizo
finish with the
Torregoso de la Sala
participation
Superior
of our
del Tribunal
justice
Electoral
of
del
the
Poder
High
Judicial de la
Chamber of
Federación.
the
Sus
Tribunal
reflexiones
of the
finales, magistrada, por
Federation,
favor.
the Federal Electoral
Muchas gracias,
Tribunal
Alberto.
Federation
Pues
and
sin duda
Chair.
creo
Thank you,
que
Alberto.
podemos
Without doubt,
encontrar un hilo
I
conductor
think
en
that
las
we
participaciones
can
que
find
hemos
means to
tenido, en
continue
donde se
analyzing the
considera que la
participations of
democracia
all
no
the members of
solo
this
se
conference.
puede
Democracy is
asumir
not
como una
only
teoría,
considered,
sino necesaria,
democracy
que
is
es
not
el
just democracy.
ejercicio en sí mismo de
Democracy,
las
its basis is a
elecciones. Creo
process
que, por
amidst
supuesto, implica
elections.
más allá del
Now,
material electoral,
implicitly, there's
tiene
much
un
more.
punto
Integrity of the
fundamental en
elections, it's
la
fundamental.
aceptación de
That's
la
the
ciudadanía
bedrock.
en las reglas.
You know,
Y
it
en
has to
eso
be
creo que tenemos
accepted by the
retos en todos
citizenship.
los
There's
países
rules,
que hemos
laws, and
ahora
regulations in all countries. We're facing all
escuchado
challenges.
cómo ha
We've
sido
heard
la
so
agenda de las
much.
elecciones
There's been
y
so much
ante la
happening amidst the
polarización
elections,
que hay,
the
creo,
polarization
en el mundo
that
entero,
exists. And I believe
la
there's great
información
polarization
genera
globally.
confianza. Me parece
Information
un punto
builds
importante que las
trust. I think
autoridades
it's very
electorales
important for electoral authorities
trabajemos por fortalecer
to
la
work and
información que demos a
strengthen
la ciudadanía para
based on
construir
solid
mayor
information that's
confianza.
streamed to the
Y el
society to
conocimiento de
build
la ley
trust
también en caso de
and
eventos como
knowledge
el
regarding
cambio
law in in the case of Mexico, we need to know our laws because there's thorough changes amidst the constitutional reform. And being knowledgeable about this will enable us to build a robust, informed debate with greater understanding based on the rules and points in which we might agree to disagree or not. But we need to have clarity about the same process, the democratic processes. We all need to understand the rules. If there's a change in design, the change in scheme, that doesn't mean that there's any setbacks. There's electoral designs, there's a democracy, but in the Mexican case, it seems to me that we needed more time. We lacked time to be a bit more knowledgeable about what's happened to the reform, the charter reform, the election reform, to elect triers of fact. We have to call the citizenship to participate, to be active. And this means that the citizenship must be very aware about the status of the country, which are the rules that guide us. And of course, citizen participation has to be greater, stronger. In Mexico, there was a strong campaign. And there's a strong campaign in which they call the citizenship to simply not go out to vote during the elections. From my perspective, I think that you have to vote for or against when you go to the voting ballot, or else you're just breaking the guiding principles of democratic elections. Because democracies or democratic elections depend on the citizenships of the citizens who cast their vote. Thank you all for your participation. I believe that this conference has been extremely important because, as a matter of fact, based on the design of things, we've had these glimpse or eureka moments that lead us to see the challenges in our democracies, in our different countries, which are here gathered, actively participating. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you for inviting for this conference. Thank you for inviting us to this cycle of conferences and panels, because based on the expertise of the academia, based on the expertise of researchers, electoral authorities, the judiciaries, electoral and administrative authorities, we have a broader vision of the best practices and the status quo of democracies in our country. Thank you all very much.
Y muchísimas gracias a usted también,
Thank
magistrada,
you,
por
ma'am,
su
very much.
liderazgo,
Thank you,
para tener
Justice,
estos
for your
espacios de
leadership.
deliberación
Thank you
que
for
cumplen con
opening
dos de los objetivos en
these
los
rooms for
cuales
conferences. We
las
meet
personas
both
ponentes han
objectives.
coincidido.
Our keynote
Número uno, la
speakers have
importancia de
agreed
sumar
on
fuerzas,
specific points. We're
también
all
desde lo
here
internacional,
collectively
para conocer y
strengthening our
reconocer
international
retos y
analysis to
posibles
acknowledge
soluciones
and
ante
define which are the
la
challenges and
realidad
find
de
common
nuestras democracias
solutions
hoy en
amidst
día.
the realities of our
Y número
democracies
dos,
nowadays. Number
poner nuestro
two,
granito de arena, hacer
we
un
all
esfuerzo por
contribute.
dar a conocer los
Put that grain
detalles
of salt. We
técnicos
need to know the
también de las
technical
elecciones que
details.
se
We need to
celebran
know
en
much more
nuestros
about the
distintos
elections
países
that are
a una
celebrated in our
audiencia
different
mucho más
countries,
amplia. Como
and
bien
share
lo
this
ha
knowledge
descrito,
with
es
a
una
broader
probada
audience.
para también
I mean,
mantener involucradas
it's
a
just a
nuestras
taste.
audiencias.
This
Sin
conference
duda
leads us
volveremos
to
con este tipo de
involve
ejercicios
others.
en distintos
Let's
formatos
continue
para
with
seguir
this type of
conociendo de nuestras
conference. Let's
democracias en
continue
el
with
mundo
this
en
type of
este balance
format. Let's
electoral. Gracias
continue
a todas
bearing
y a
more
todos
knowledge about
las
our
personas
democracies
ponentes,
globally.
a
Thank
quienes
you
nos
all,
siguieron por
keynote
las
speakers.
plataformas
Thank you all for following
y redes
what we
sociales,
just streamed through
y
social
también
media and different
por
channels.
parte
Thank
del
you for
Tribunal
following the
Electoral del Poder
transmission.
Judicial de
We
la
thank the
Federación.
Federal
Un
Tribunal,
agradecimiento y un saludo del magistrado
Federal
presidente
Electoral
Gilberto Vázquez
Tribunal of the
García,
Federation,
de
and
las
we thank you on
magistradas
behalf
y
of
magistrados que
Mr.
integran
Batis
la Sala Superior, y
Garcia
los
and those
veremos
who are
en
part of
la
the
próxima
high
edición de este
chamber
ejercicio
of this
en
authority. We thank
2026.
you
Muchas
and we'll
gracias a
invite
todos
you
y a
to the
todas.
future edition of what's taking place in this sequence of conference. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Thank you.